All right, guys, I'm going to be in Orlando uh, having some fun at a little conference. So, this video is going to be over the digestive tract up to human digestion. You already covered that, so I'm not going to cover it again. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Just listen to my theme music. All right, this is going to be a video over chapter 41, and basically, you've already covered a lot of 41, obviously, last year in biology. I'm not going to go over all the parts of the alimentary canal, the parts of the small intestine, large intestine, all stuff you need to know, all good things. I'm going to focus on some different things, and we're going to start with this video. Some of it should be a major review for you, like this first slide. This video itself will be on the portal, so if you need to copy anything, you can do that. No big deal. But basically, when we look at this, there are three types of animals. They're either herbivore, carnivores, and omnivores. You can think of any ecosystem, and each one of these niches will be filled by one of these three things. Omnivores, the best examples of those would be something like a lot of primates are omnivores, where they'll eat insects and fruits, pigs, humans, things like that. Carnivores eat other animals, and herbivores are only plants and algae. In general, though, we can fit things into these three categories, but don't limit them to those. A lot of things are opportunistic feeders, and will get their nutrients wherever they can get them from. All right, so what we're going to look at basically is in the chapter is the actual diet and where it kind of goes. Think about this. When you think about a diet, any animal's diet you can think of in your mind, and take any species right now, picture them. All of them will have they have three basic needs. Number one is a chemical need. They need the food to provide chemical energy. A second need would be for organic building blocks. And the third would be to get those essential nutrients that are required by all cells. Now, we've covered a lot of this already when we talked about the citric acid cycle and how that all works. I'm not going to go into all that. Obviously, if you're a little suspect in that area, you might want to review that. All right, so there are basically, when you think about there are four classes of essential nutrients, and those four classes can be broken up into four different areas. The first one are what we call essential amino acids. Okay, so remember that, essential amino acids. The second is essential fatty acids. So once again, essential fatty acids. Then the last two are probably the ones that we're more familiar with. When you think of a diet, you think of these two, and those are vitamins and minerals. Okay, vitamins like A, B, C, D, all those, and minerals. And basically, if you look on this chart here that I kind of provided, you can actually kind of see that, the essential nutrients, water, obviously, some of those fatty acids, so the essential fatty acids, some vitamins, not all. Then you have your minerals, and then some amino acids. Okay. On the other side of that, what are non-essential? Carbohydrates. They do provide energy, but you can get that energy from other sources. Lipids, and some fatty acids, other types of vitamins and amino acids. And we'll be looking at those a little bit more detail. Now, if you know Matt Beaver, that dude probably knows a lot more about all this stuff than I do. So this is kind of a very general explanation of all this. Here you can actually see basically the 45 things you need to live. And you can kind of hopefully think about where they come from. On the first end are the vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Those are all what we're going to call fat soluble. And then the rest of them, you've heard of them in other names. The most common is vitamin B, vitamin B2, B3, and so on. But they really do have other names, like riboflavin is something that you may have heard of. Vitamin B12, something that's kind of a new thing. A lot of people are getting that injected, helps with energy. For example, energy drinks usually are high in vitamin B, high in vitamin C, and things like that. Other things that are required, you need glucose. You need to be able to produce it or get it from somewhere else. There's one fat that is required, 18 minerals, and you can kind of see those, and 10 amino acids. When you go to buy a protein drink, Those are the key ones that you'll want to make sure are found in there. All the other ones can be produced. Okay. So everything that you need can be made from these 45 essential ingredients. All right, there are 20 different amino acids. All of them can kind of come from your diet or be composed somewhere from the foods that you eat. When you look at an individual amino acid, there are two parts to amino acid that you need to know. The first part is this carboxyl group right up here, okay, and then the other one is the amine group, the NH2, right here. This information right here is actually the side chain. So there's the side chain, there's that side chain, there's that side, and so on. Notice they're all different. When we talked about protein structure, if we were talking about the primary structure is how these things, what order they lined up in. The secondary structure was how the hydrogen bonds between the backbone, so that would be that part here, interacted, and then the tertiary structure was the interaction of these side chains, and then finally you had the arrangement of the polypeptides, and that was your quaternary structure. If you formed a disulfide bond like this right here, it adds structure, but those are kind of the different parts of it. The remaining amino acids must be obtained from food in a pre-made form, and if you don't have that, you're going to get it. The best source of those are from meat, eggs, cheese, and thus those are kind of the complete proteins. If a person is a vegetarian, then they got to go about finding ways to make sure to get certain foods, and a lot of times they have to have a combination of foods to provide them with the nutrients that they need with those essential amino acids. And so what we'll end up seeing people do is you just can't be a vegetarian and live off lettuce or even some type of kidney bean. You need to get your proteins from other sources, and that's what they do. They'll eat tofu, kidney beans, things like that. You can actually kind of see here's the essential amino acids that you really need, and where do they mainly come from. Once again, Matt Beaver will tell you this. You don't need a rocket scientist. The number one place you can get most of these are eggs. Okay, great source of that. Of the different forms. If you are not if you're a vegetarian, you got to look. You need some soy, or you can get it from sesame. Soy is a pretty good source. A lot of people who are lactose will get a lot of their nutrients from soy, peanuts, sesame oil are other examples of where you can get the necessary amino acids. All right, kind of continuing with what I said. Most plants don't actually have the complete amino acids, and so what we need to do is, if you look kind of at this this diagram over here, you can see grains, barley, buckwheat, cornmeal, those types of things, nuts like pumpkin and sunflower seeds. They're complete protein sources, but they're deficient in some key ones, right? They're deficient in lysine, but they're high in these other ones. Or if you go down here in the legumes, the beans, chickpeas, things like that. If you want to make a nice hummus, right? Old Stavros, chickpeas is used for hummus. Delicious stuff. But you need chickpeas, right? That's going to be good in certain areas, but also lacking in others. So you need both in order to get this to work. And I kind of mentioned this already. You got to supplement those necessary ingredients if necessary. All right, so then we have the essential fatty acids, and when we look at the essential fatty acids, the way you can kind of look at this is that most of these things are, they can actually be synthesized themselves, so they don't really necessarily need them, and there's a rarity about actually not having enough of those, okay? When you think about the essential fatty acids that that an animal needs, there are two different types. You talked about saturated versus unsaturated. Think of a saturated fatty acid as saturated with hydrogen. So when you have the backbone and you have that carbons and hydrogens everywhere, there can be a hydrogen. There is one. That's a saturated fat. An unsaturated fat has a double bond somewhere. It creates a kink. Tends to make it more of a liquid in room temperature. There tends to be oils. Once again, that is a unsaturated because it doesn't have the maximum amount of hydrogen available. We look at vitamins. Vitamins are organic molecules. and they, once again, they're not needed in super large amount. I kind of put this image on here because I always see people wanting to take vitamin supplements, which for a lot of people are important. Having a healthy diet will usually suffice. And what a lot of times happens is those vitamins are water soluble. Okay, those water soluble, where do they mainly go? They go down here. If you've ever taken a bunch of vitamins, you have very like almost neon colored urine, right? It's because most of those are just being wasted and going down the drain. And most of the water soluble do come from things like these fruits I have here. Fat soluble, easy way to remember them is ADEK. Okay, for vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. Those are the fat soluble ones. Now those you can actually take too much of. You don't want to take those. If you want a supplement of those, typically you need a doctor's prescription due to the fact that you can actually overdose on vitamins. So it is possible. Okay, when you look at this kind of diagram here, you can kind of see the different types. So the water soluble up here, more of the B's and C's. They can be found. You can see the main source of those, and also their scientific name is also placed here. Important to know this, and once again, it's a lot easier on the AP exam or whatever. If you just remember that ADEK are fat soluble, then basically everything else is water soluble. But notice the difference where these come from. D that's what you get from milk, so that you can have a little too much of that. Vegetable oil, nuts, seeds, all those types of things. So you can also see their purpose. This is a diagram in your book. It's table 41.1. You should look at this and kind of memorize a lot of this and see the use of this and what's the important one. This one right here, folic acid. We're going to talk about that one a little bit later, especially some in this area where it talks about birth defects, some causes of lack of folic acid and what it can cause for the individual, and more importantly for the baby. When you think of minerals, you think of a lot of times the periodic table. That's what at least I think about down here. This chart down here is kind of nice. It breaks down what you really need and the minimum amounts and the major amounts. Depending on the difference for us humans, right? We need a lot of iron. Iron's an important part of hemoglobin. It helps transfer oxygen, whereas a plant needs a lot of magnesium because in chlorophyll, it's the center molecule in chlorophyll, A and B, which does a lot of the which is necessary for photosynthesis. All right, you can kind of see this. These are the kind of the major ones, what they're responsible for. Again, when a lot of this is important in development. So a person who's malnourished or has issues with not having a diet that is kind of key in all these major ingredients, whether it's vitamins or minerals, they can have a lot of issues from bone and tooth deformities, things like that. So always important to have, especially early in development, parts of the world that are lacking a kind of continual nutritional supplements in their diet tend to have issues in one of these areas. This is chart 41.2, and once again, it is important for you to probably look at this. I'd either photocopy it or whatever and be able to identify a lot of the major issues that are associated with these conditions. Deficiency, when we talk about that, well, what does that mean? There's a couple different terms that are used a lot of times synonymously, but they're not necessarily the same thing. For example, malnourishment, that's just the long-term absence from the diet of one or more of those essential nutrients. And so even though a person may be having food, but if we put them only on a diet of rice and there's not enough protein or essential amino acids or minerals, they can still have some major issues. It's one of the things that upsets me the most is seeing pictures like this of these poor animals. Just how inconsiderate humans can be at times. When we talk about deficiency, I found this kind of was interesting. Your book talks about this golden rice. You can kind of see it down here. It's a genetically engineered strain of rice, and what it adds is beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is something that we naturally convert into vitamin A in the body, which is important. A lot of areas in the world do not have enough vitamin A in their diet, and so this is an easy way to supplement that. You can kind of see an article here about Pope Francis and his idea of genetic engineering and golden rice and why it's important. And you can kind of see that, you think, well, why does that matter? Vitamin A, it's not that important. Well, this golden rice, basically through the process of genetic engineering and biosynthesis of that beta-carotene, which can eventually be converted to vitamin A, can be then put in rice. And since it's put in the rice, the idea is to help fortify that food and be used in areas in our world that have a shortage of the vitamin A. Now, okay, well, vitamin A, who cares? You know, if they're getting food, it doesn't matter. Well, on average, it's estimated that it kills about 670,000 children under the age of 5 each year. I'll repeat, 670,000 children. So if we can simply make a rice, something cheap and easily to transmit around the world, and able to give that to people in those areas, and we could save that many lives, that's a pretty cool thing. Here's a map of the world of different areas you can kind of see that are affected by this. Obviously, once again, not a shocker. The critical areas are parts of Africa, so we can save a lot of lives in Africa, and then, you know, kind of elsewhere, a lot of places that are a little bit poor areas in our world. So India, Africa, places like Mexico, China, could all be benefited from this vitamin A that's found in golden rice. Under nutrition, when we talk about that, what does that mean? It's not the same thing as necessarily when we're talking about lack of food. Basically, what happens is if you are starting a diet, I always see this with wrestlers when they're trying to cut weight. Well, what happens when you try to cut weight? Your body naturally starts using stored fat. It takes carbohydrates that it was using for maybe structural purposes, starts breaking down its own proteins. You lose muscle mass. They can actually have a lot of issues with sleep deprivation, things like that. You can actually get protein deficiency of the brain itself in very severe cases. Now, I'm not saying that's what happens with wrestlers, but then you can die and suffer also other damages. So there's a reason why when you talk about dieting and just going into a starvation mode, it's extremely harmful. It's not beneficial actually to you, and it causes more problems than necessary. What the achievement or what the goal is. Also, with that, we were talking about genetic issues down here at the bottom. One major issue that was kind of cool that we found was that a lot of babies were being born with neural tube defects, such as a spina bifida here. There's a lot of other ones as well, and what they found out was that was due to a bad diet by the mother. That the mothers were not consuming enough folic acid, and so not having that folic acid or vitamin B9 was causing the deficiency. So any woman who is before they're trying to conceive, doctors recommend several months beforehand getting on folic acid. Okay, so it's not uncommon. That simple change in diet by adding that supplement to ensure, once again, because it's a vitamin B, it's not part of the fat soluble. Even if a woman eats a lot of food high in folic acid, they can still not worry about those conditions. All right. After that, we get into 41.2, and basically what that talks about is the process of the 4 major stages of food processing in almost all animals. That's obviously ingestion's first, digestion of the material, which is going to be the breakdown, absorption, which is going to be the act of taking in, and then eliminating any waste product with the purpose of having as little waste as possible and as much nutrition being absorbed as possible. Ingestion is actually the act of eating. So as you can see, this lady here is attempting to eat that. Let's see if anyone smart here knows that actually is a picture from Omaha. Anyone know what that is? Sure, the sub does. I'm assuming my sub's Groff. It might be somebody else, but that is the Stellinator. It is a restaurant here in town where you can eat that. You get some deal. I have yet to attempt it, so don't ask me if I've done it. I'm sure someone like Lindsay would tap out really easy if trying to challenge something like that. Right, Lindsay? All right, here's the different parts. You can see this little cute furry bunny rabbit. Ingestion, which is going to be then taken into digestion, which is going to be either broken into 2 types, either mechanical or chemical. Those are going to happen in different regions of the body. Some will do mechanical, some will do chemical. Then you're going to have the absorption period, where those are going to be taken into the... First, you're going to have absorption into the bloodstream, and then absorption directly into the cells themselves, and then last, elimination. kind of like I eliminated Eddie Lindsay on the dodgeball. All right, when you look at types of taken in, there's several different types. We're not going to go too much in this. This is a kind of a picture from your book. You have bulk feeders, then you have kind of your substrate feeders, your fluid feeders, and your suspension feeders. When you look at those different types, first off, when you think about a suspension feeder, those are typically aquatic animals, and they are going to sift out small particles directly from the water. They have to have special adaptations in order to do that. They tend to be rather large. The closest thing around here that does something like that, if you were to know what a paddlefish is a suspension feeder in the Missouri River. Only way you can actually catch it is by snagging really cool looking animals. Please don't kill them. They're pretty. All right. Then you have your substrate feeders. They're animals that must live in or on their actual food source themselves, as you can kind of see there. Fluid feeders, mosquitoes, they will actually suck directly from the living host. Interesting little side fact, when you think of this, a lot of times people think of like vampire bats. Vampire bats, what they actually do is they don't actually have like teeth that do that. They use their teeth almost like scissors and cut typically cattle or chicken. And in doing so, they'll kind of lick up the blood, and their saliva has a natural anticoagulant, prevents the blood from clotting, but it also has a something for the pain. So basically, the cow or the chicken never knows that it's bleeding and able to suck up the blood. It was discovered by Europeans after the book Dracula was written. So it's kind of interesting. Before Dracula was created, there was actually these things, but no one really knew about them. So kind of a little interesting side note. If anybody cares, probably no one does. And then last, you got your bulk feeders. Bulk feeders are going to eat large pieces of food. Hopefully you can figure out which one we are of this. If you want to see a bulk feeder, go into old Mr. Guerin's room and you can kind of check that out. Digestion itself is basically that process of breaking down food. There are two ways to do that. Mechanical digestion. The best way to represent mechanical digestion is through the process of chewing. And its purpose is to reduce to break down the piece into smaller pieces, and in doing so increasing the surface area. The analogy I have, if you were to take a Alka-Seltzer tablet, throw it in water, it's going to break down, but if you take that tablet before you throw it in the water and crumple it up, it'll dissolve a lot faster, increasing surface area. Chewing is the easiest way, but there are other parts of the alimentary canal that will do mechanical digestion as well. Chemical digestion is going to be more into taking the nutrients and breaking down by adding different chemicals to it. And basically we use a lot of different enzymes to split the bonds, and in the process we're going to need some water in doing so. Absorption is the take-up of those nutrients that are necessary for the body, those essential nutrients. And then we got elimination, which is going to be the removal of those waste products. There are two types of digestion, what we refer to as intracellular digestion and extracellular digestion. Intracellular digestion, food particles are going to be engulfed by a particular cell through a process of phagocytosis. It's a form of active transport. In doing so, food vacuoles will actually be formed, and those food vacuoles will be inside the cytoplasm of a particular cell. They'll be then fused with a lysosome. The lysosomes themselves will have some forms, typically several forms of hydrolytic enzymes, and those hydrolytic enzymes will break down the particles inside the food particle or the food container. The extracellular digestion is going to be the breakdown of food particles outside a particular cell. Once again, it's going to basically, in order to do that, it's going to have compartments in order to do that. And animals with simple body plans will typically have some form of gastrovascular cavity that will function both in the digestive and also the distribution of the nutrients themselves. Okay? So intra versus extracellular digestion, and you can kind of see that down here in those diagrams that I provided. Animals that are kind of more complex than those simple things like a sponge or a jellyfish will have a alimentary canal, and the alimentary canal, there can either be a one-way or a two-way alimentary canal. A two-way is a little bit less sophisticated, isn't as efficient, because where it enters in, it'll have to leave as well, and so it has to have multiple functions and not be very good at doing its job particularly. It has to be good at multiple jobs. A one-way canal is like ours, where it enters in, unlike what South Park might tell you. Food may only enter in the mouth and leave through the anus, not a reverse process is not possible. Heaven forbid you get all your science from South Park, Lindsay. And you can kind of see here. So these are just some classic example. I know in McCardle's class you covered this in pretty good detail, talking about a couple different types of alimentary canals and how they work. Chapter 43 is really just 41.3, excuse me, is all about mammal digestion. And if you think about the mammal digestion system, which you guys have already covered, like I said last year, it's basically an alimentary canal. It has a lot of glands and ducts, and from those glands and the ducts, we secrete digestive juices into particular regions of the alimentary canal that aid in digestion. Okay, some of the major ones that you'll need to know for this are the salivary glands, the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder are all examples of salivary glands in it. And you kind of see this here. Food will enter in through the oral cavity up here. You have these accessory glands up here. They're going to release certain chemicals. It's important to know what type of digestion occurs where. So obviously mechanical digestion occurs in the oral cavity, but also chemical digestion in the form of breakdown the beginning breakdown of carbohydrates. The food will then pass down the pharynx in a process of peristalsis. And peristalsis is just that process of rhythmic contractions of the muscles of the esophagus, which move the food down. Before we move from one area to the next, we do have sphincters. I know that's a word that maybe you've heard of, and you may not realize that there are different sphincters found throughout. So there's a esophageal sphincter, there's one at the end of the stomach, a couple in the small intestine. So there are more than just the typical, what we think of as sphincters, and you can see the esophageal sphincter right there. They usually typically represent the end of a system, allow us to keep food into a particular area, allow us to continue digesting that food as needed. All right. Once again, all those different systems or parts of the alimentary canal in the human, it is important for you to know. You should review that from last year. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but what I do want to focus in on is the different processes and how do we go about breaking down food. So when food enters in the mouth, the oral cavity, the pharynx, and the esophagus, their job is to do mechanical digestion through chewing, but they also will have salivary glands that will deliver saliva. And one of the functions of saliva is to lubricate the food to allow it to flow easier through the alimentary canal. We will also be exposing to the enzyme salivary amylase, and what that will do is it'll start the process of the breakdown of glucose polymers. Okay, so it's going to start breaking these things down into smaller things. When we look at mucus, basically mucus is a combination of a couple different things. It's water, it's salt, it's cells, and it's also glycoproteins, all found in there, which are going to aid in the process. I always remember if you took AP Psych, I'm assuming he still does this, Mr. Powers says you kind of spit into a cup after a set amount of time and then you drink it. People get freaked out. It didn't freak me out because at the end of the day, I kind of realized, well, it's just my own, amylase along with all this stuff. Plus, it's like 98% water. Once the food moves past that, it's going to enter into the stomach. And once it kind of gets down there, what's going to happen is protein digestion will actually begin. So how that occurs is because, number one, there's a lot of gastric juices that are found in the stomach. And the gastric juices themselves have an extremely low pH, a pH around 2. And what this does is two things. Number one, it kills any bacteria. So we can kill the bacteria. Number two, it can help denature proteins. So we can start the process of denaturing proteins the same way we would with by cooking an egg. The gastric juice itself is made up of basically two things, hydrochloric acid or HCl, and then the other thing is obviously this stuff right here, this pepsin. Okay, pepsin is in the category of enzymes that we refer to as proteinases, and their job is to break down proteins. Okay, and they do this by taking the proteins and cleaving them into smaller and smaller parts. The egg itself has to have a lot of different materials in order to do that, and so there is going to be some really strong cells that are epithelial cells that will actually protect the cells themselves. There are two types of major cells that you need to know in the stomach. The first one are what we call chief cells, and the other ones are the parental cells. The chief cells, their job or function is to produce what's going to be eventually produced into pepsin, and then the other ones are the parietal cells, and their job is to actually make the hydrochloric acid. So they make the hydrochloric acid. The nucleic acid and digestion, it will actually happen based off of in the small intestine. The first stage of the small intestine, the duodenum, we're going to actually dump in some more enzymes that are going to come from the pancreas and other sources. And you can kind of see that in this line here. So first thing is we're going to continue with the breakdown. Notice we didn't break down at all any carbohydrates in the stomach. We're going to resume that activity by dropping in pancreatic amylase. Is going to be released by the pancreas. The pancreas also provides trypsin and another type of proteinase, chymotrypsin, which is going to also continue the breakdown into smaller and smaller materials. So the pancreas aids in protein digestion, and then obviously we're going to aid in the nucleic acid breakdown as well. And then there's going to be lipase that's going to be provided. Now, the lipase, its job is to take those large fats and break them down into the fatty acids themselves and the glycerol. Now, this is going to need help in the small intestine itself. We're going to have to dump something in from the liver to aid in this process. And that's where some of the other accessory glands are going to come into play. One thing that we need to remember, on top of dumping in all these enzymes, the pancreas does another function. It's going to actually add an alkaline solution, and that alkaline solution will help neutralize the hydrochloric acid that is leaving the stomach. If we don't have that, we can actually get ulcers in the small intestine, and those can be quite painful and life-threatening as well. It's going to affect our ability to completely digest and then eventually absorb nutrients in the small intestine. Once again, you can kind of see also, so the pancreas gets credit for most of the digestion. The small intestine itself does actually add to this process. There are enzymes that will be used to help with disaccharides, also continue the breakdown of the smaller and smaller polypeptides into amino acids. Those all come from the epithelial cells of the small intestine. The only other accessory organ that we haven't really mentioned is the liver. The liver is going to add bile into the small intestine, and what it does is it will emulsify the fat particles and aid in the breakdown of fat. So that's why if a person has had their gallbladder removed, it's just a bladder that's going to store bile. The liver still produces bile and will drip it in. The problem is you don't have a large amount. So if you were to go eat a really fatty food and you don't have your gallbladder, what ends up happening is we can't emulsify it, and you tend to have some intestinal issues because of that. So people who have had their gallbladder removed, they do have to limit the amount of fatty foods that they consume at any given time. You can kind of see the breakdown of this. Once again, most of the nutrients are going to be broken down in the duodenum, and then the rest of the small intestine's main job is absorption. Another thing that's kind of important is the hepatic vein here, and what its job is to actually take, if you ever get asked this, the nutrient-rich blood, and it takes it from the small intestine to the liver. Liver there, it's going to regulate, it's going to break down molecules. It'll actually remove a lot of toxins as well. It's an important part of this. And so that's an important vein to take those end products of digestion to the liver. The liver will then go about cleaning and purifying it, and then we can send it throughout the body. The absorption of this actually happens in the epithelial cells of the small intestine. You can kind of see all this. And then there's a diagram also in your book that kind of covers this as well. All right, that's all I got. Hopefully you enjoyed this. You will be receiving your take-home test over these previous 2 chapters for homework. And I will see you guys when I get back from Orlando. Hopefully I'll bring back some Mickey Mouse ears for Rodino to wear in class. Have a good weekend, and see you guys on like Monday or Tuesday.